Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy and The Long Ride Home. Before I jump in with today's guest, I want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do here, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really, really helps us to make the progress. To find out about our certification courses, online video libraries, books, and other courses, please go to rupertisaacson.com. So now let's jump in. All right, lads, this one is a real treat for me because I've got one of my oldest friends sitting on Zoom, Tom Parsons. Tom, I have known for 40 years, I think. So clearly, obviously, since before I was born, or he was born. And I've watched, participated in, and cheered on the events of Tom's live free, ride free life, decade by decade, and still am. And I wanted him on the show because, as you know, I don't always want people who are well known here. I don't want there to be this idea that to lead a self-actualized, fulfilled or successful life, that somehow requires some public thing. It doesn't. We know this. It's much more personal than that. And so how do people fulfill their soul needs through the course of living the lives that are quite normal? You know, we go to school, maybe we go to university, we get this job, we get that job, we meet someone, we have kids, then suddenly we're drowning in nappies for 500 years, and then we look up and we're 80. And that is, I think, the story of many of our lives. However, what happens in between is often amazing. Tom is, I think, the epitome of that for me. What has driven Tom is art history, but in ways that are maybe somewhat unusual. And this has brought him to, at the point of retirement, really now a whole new career with certain types of festival and certain types of production and encouragement of the arts with youth. And the next 40 years are going to be as interesting, if not more so, as the last 40 years. So here is a self-actualized, live free, ride free life, right on a plate for all of us to eat from and enjoy. So Tom Parsons, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, Rude. Nice to see you.
Now, what none of you can see, actually, you probably can see because we're going to be putting this up on YouTube these days, is you might be forgiven for thinking that I got Bill Nye on the show. And I couldn't actually get Bill Nye, so I got Tom to stand in because he looks exactly like Bill Nye. And I think that Bill Nye actually has been secretly following Tom around for the last few decades, copying him and turning that into his acting career. Because I don't know anyone I don't think even Bill Nye is as Bill Nye as Tom. So, Tom, talk to us now about why you love art history so much. How did that start with you as a kid? Where were you born and brought up? How did it enter your life? And at what point did you know, yeah, that's what I'm going to do? I don't know how I'm going to do it, but that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, thank you. I was born and brought up in a comfortable house in southwest London. I guess we had some nice paintings or posters and things at home. I went to the Tate at 15 in rather a sort of hormonal state, thought and enjoyed it. Didn't understand anything I was looking at, but enjoyed that. We didn't do art history at school. I ended up going to university to study English. And I got very drunk one night, and the next day I was in such a state that I knew that I couldn't really function. So I ended up, I thought, I'll go to an art history lecture because I'm not taking the subject. I'm vaguely interested in it, but more to the point, it'll be dark and warm and I know I can fall asleep. So I went to this lecture and I did fall asleep. But when I woke up, the slide that was on the screen was a Roscoe. And I remembered I'd seen this or seen a painting by Rothko in the Tate and thought it was rubbish. It was just a big rectangle. Anyone could do that. So I listened. I was intrigued to see what the lecturer was going to say. And I had a sort of, road to Damascus moment. I converted on the spot to believing, and still do believe, Rothko's rather amazing, completely amazing. Anyway, wobbled out of the lecture, went to my department, the English department, and said, please, can I change my degree to art history? So I ended up doing both and left university. And I suppose at that point decided, I'll try to make a living out of what I love, which by that point was European art. So yeah.
Okay, there's a couple of things I want to ask you there. Okay, so Rothko, those of you who don't know Rothko, can you describe Rothko, please, Tom?
Okay, Rothko is a New York painter, died in the early 70s. He's part of the abstract expressionist school, and he painted large scale, his characteristic style that he sort of reached in his maturity are large scale abstracts, very simple on first viewing, sort of huge, rectangular, moody, pulsating
blobs of color.
Yeah. And he claimed for them a sort of spiritual eloquence. He never went that much further in terms of trying to explain, but he did make certain assertions, and you can agree or not, but I'm one of the ones who do agree that they have that sort of power and impact. And yeah, he's good.
It's interesting though, because I don't know you so much as an abstract dude. I know you much more as a high Renaissance art, Baroque art historian. I've been with you in Italy, and I want to go into this and the story of art and why it's so amazing and why it helps us understand who we are and why we are, what we might do wrong again in the future. But you also said something about a road to Damascus moment there and conversion. One of the best ways I ever heard you describe yourself was as a died again Christian. Talk to us a little bit about, you were that moody adolescent, then you got religion, then you went off and did some interesting stuff before university, and then you changed a bit. And why? Talk us through that.
Okay, yeah. I did have a very sort of Christian phase in my sort of later teenage years.
Why?
Years.
Why? Because I know you weren't brought up that way.
It was on the one hand, I think it was actually a form of rebellion, and because it was it was a sort of evangelical form of the Christian faith. It was sort of, so it was in one sense, it was sort of radical and ultra committed and so on. Anyway, so there was that aspect to it. But it also simultaneously fulfilled a kind of teenage longing for the ideal, and on the back of that, I had a year gap year, for a year off between school and university, and I went off to a phenomenal place as a volunteer in Hong Kong. And I volunteered for a woman who ran a rehab center for heroin addicts, Hong Kong Chinese, all ages, all backgrounds, but all of whom had in common that their lives had been destroyed by heroin. And she took them off the streets and put them back together. And as I say, I worked there for 6 months. And yeah, that was extraordinary. And I suppose I don't know, something about, I don't know, what I realized there, and I realize, I suppose there's a common thread through my life, is that for me, I ended up teaching, but the mechanism is similar. In other words, when you put yourself in a position where you are, as it were, giving to other people, whether it's in a classroom or a rehab center in Hong Kong, you get so much back. So there's a sort of selfishness in my motivation. There always has been, or rather it's just a circle. If you give, you get back. And that's a good way to live.
I remember a story you told me about that time in Hong Kong, a bit of a life or death situation where involving oil.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Please tell that story and what that left you. What insights did you gain from that experience?
I think the story is, it was the only time I've ever felt threatened, I think, whilst I was there. But I was in this flat. There were I don't know, about 20 of us living in an apartment in a high rise in Hong Kong. And my role there was, I was the sort of odd job boy, really, just doing menial stuff. But anyway, one evening, I should explain that all of the cooking was done by the guys, because they knew how to cook. I certainly didn't know how to cook, and I certainly didn't know how to cook Chinese food. So they did all the cooking. I had no idea what I was eating half the time. I did recognize bits of pig head every now and again, but anyway, whatever. But one evening there was a row in the kitchen, and I think I was the only volunteer at that moment in the flat. And I went into the kitchen to try and sort this thing out, whatever it was. And the guy who was really, really cross and angry about whatever it was turned, and he was holding a wok with smoking oil. It's very, very hot. And he was threatening to throw it all over me. And at that moment, one of the other guys came up and just put his hand on my shoulder, I think, and just sort of said, "Tom, just step back. And so I did, but I was quite shaken by that. It was the only time there was ever any sort of threat of violence to me. And yeah, I was a bit shaken at the time. It passed. It was fine. Actually, the desire amongst the guys in that flat to straighten out their lives overrode such moments. And so, I was immensely privileged unfortunate to be part of that.
Those kinds of early experiences, do you feel that they're actually quite important in the life of a young person? And in terms of understanding your own resilience and understanding perspective taking, how do you think? I can think of similar things that happened to me, at that age and over the years, and I can sort of see how I've drawn on those things. I believe now, for many, many reasons, our youth, they live in a slightly more sheltered universe than we might have done. Things were very different back in the 80s. What do you think an experience like that did for you as you became an adult? What did to your subconscious?
The whole experience, that my experience there was, well, actually one of the things that's relevant is that I think I remember after about 3 months there, I was aware that other friends of mine were, partying in India or Australia, wherever they were, or even back in London, and I wasn't. And I was my life there was, very limited, very, very strictly organized, and so on. I had one day off a week. And after about 3 months, I remember saying to Jackie, who's the lady who ran the place. So Jackie, I'm finding this really quite hard. I got this urge to go. I just want to go traveling and so on. And she said, well, look, you're a volunteer. You can go. You can leave anytime you like. But I just want to remind you that when you wrote, ask if you could come, you said you would stay for 6 months. And I said, yeah, I know. And I know that I ought to stay because that's what I said I would do. I'm just saying. She said, well, look, you are free. My problem was that I had a ticket, my flight back, I'd prepaid. I didn't have the money to extend it. Anyway, I went off, had a think, went back to see her the next day and said, no, of course I'm going to stay. I can't break my promise. I won't be able to live with myself. So, and I think about a week later, she came back and said, right, we're going to pay for the extension for your ticket. So I did get the opportunity to go. I went off into China at the end. So what did I learn? I just learned, if you make a promise, you stick to it, and for your own, so that you can look yourself in the mirror.
You've spent now some decades working with kids who were your age, more or less, when you had to make that decision. So I might circle back to it later. When I met you, which was at university after you'd come back from that, you were a year above me. So you were already a year in before I showed up. And I seem to recall that we didn't really become close friends until my second year. So you were already, a couple of years past that experience. And of course, I knew you as maybe not quite so straight-laced a fellow. What changed from that evangelical Christian thing?
Okay.
Why did it change? But what did it leave you with that you still draw on to this day?
Okay. Going to university, I realized, I very consciously realized I didn't know anyone there. I knew no one at university. So on arrival, I realized, well, I could be anyone. I could become anyone that I choose. And I certainly had, if you like, intellectual misgivings about the Christian path I had been following. And so it wasn't at all difficult to kind of park my faith at all. No, that was great because it meant all kinds of activities I had not allowed myself that were available, and that was all very exciting. Indulgent and so on. That was great. But what I kept was I sort of kept the idealism, the ideals, the got rid of the dogma. It was quite a good deal, I think.
To keep the ideals but get rid of the dogma. That's nice. What are the ideals?
The ideals are all love, forgiveness, the ideal of God, living for something which is bigger than you.
Service.
Yes, but bearing in mind that I had worked out that if you do that, you get a huge amount back. So I don't want this to sound
That necessarily wrong. I mean, one has that.
No, it's not wrong at all.
Spirituality presumably is an ecosystem like anything else, right?
It's not wrong at all. I just don't want. It's a rather beautiful circuit.
Yeah,
that feeds everyone.
Also, a lot of the art that you take people to see is religious art. I've been with you, and the Renaissance art is half of it is religious and half of it's allegorical. Do you feel that that early ardor that you had gives you an insight into when you're explaining the emotion behind these
Yeah.
stories?
Yes. Yeah. No doubt. No
Yeah.
doubt. And I, interesting actually. I know. So all of that time I spent reading the good book has, paid me back as
Because you know all the stories that are in the pictures.
I know the stories, and I have a sense of, I have my own sense of what they mean
Yes.
and what they may have meant to a Renaissance artist or the viewers in Renaissance times.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's invaluable to help people put themselves in the mindset of not just maybe who the painter was, but who the people were who were seeing that painting or that sculpture. All right. So we're at university, and I remember some things because I was such a diligent student. I was working so hard. Of course, I couldn't really spare much time for noticing other things that other people went on to because I had my nose in my books so much. But I do remember a few small things. Like I remember we went to university in York, by the way, listeners. And in York's a very beautiful medieval town. It's still got a medieval wall around it, and everything inside that wall is somewhat of a museum piece. And there's a big cathedral called York Minster. I seem to remember you climbing York Minster scaffolding one frosty night. What I've always found intriguing about you is you're my Tweedy friend that wears suits and to some degree follows the societal rules, except when you don't. So, why did you climb the scaffolding of York Minster, which is a huge building, very dangerous?
Yeah, I would.
Talk to me about that side of you. You also were running up and down from London on this ancient old motorbike that was total death trap. And I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to pay you a compliment, is you, I think, are one of the most insanely physically brave people I know. But you pull it out at really strange moments. Why? What's going on with that? And how does that help with art, joy, expression, fulfillment? Why is it important to have this side of oneself, do you think?
Yeah. Okay. I did climb up the scaffolding, look at the back of the Minster, and that was great fun. It was really stupid. I wouldn't do it now. And yeah, the motorbike. Oh goodness me. Anyway, no. There's obviously there's a part of me which still needs, I suppose, to do stupid / unconventional things, despite actually, quite a conventional lifestyle. I suppose it's a release, but
Well, you say it's a release. Is it? It's a release from what?
I haven't climbed up anything quite like that recently. No, it's a test, isn't it? It's sort of, let's see what I can do.
Where I'm going with this is you've had a lot of, we're going to go into this in a minute. I've had to spend the last decades doing a lot of pastoral care for people who were the age that you were when you were off to Hong Kong and China and climbing up York Minster. This idea of, I'm a great believer that particularly when you're young, you need risk. You need it like you need oxygen in order to, like a plant needs sunlight in order to grow. At the same time, it is risky, but we're hunter-gatherers. We're supposed to, at a certain point, take the spear and go into the bush and see if we can come back with a wildebeest while dodging the lions. And if we don't do that, we maybe don't achieve certain life skills, but we also got to stay alive while we do it. And you've been in this interesting position in the last few years of trying to help people in those years who are probably having that need navigate also while being responsible for them and, staying within the legalities and all of that stuff. It's a very tricky line to tread, whether we're doing it personally or whether, you're responsible for others. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I feel it relates to self-fulfillment. It also relates to art. But just talk to me a little bit about that from your experience personally with your own 3 boys and all the kids who've been under your care this last 30 years. This thing about risk, this thing about challenge, this thing about rule breaking. Why is it so important?
Okay. I ended up for 20 odd years working as a the term is housemaster. It's basically a pastoral role in a boarding school.
He did actually work in Hogwarts, listeners. Yeah.
And
Directly under Dumbledore.
And so in a lot of that, so I spent a lot of time talking teenagers. As often as not, it was when they were in trouble because they'd broken whichever rule it was. Obviously, if you've done a little bit of that yourself, then you can relate. You can relate to those who've made their own mistakes, and those mistakes are useful. My own moments of madness certainly helped me understand or sympathize with those who I was actually having to admonish. And so, I was able to come across as someone who understood, whilst at the same time saying, well, look, you're going to, there are school rules, you're going to have to suck up whatever the sanction is. And let's learn from this, that sort of thing. Yeah. So all of that very useful. I suppose my own slightly ambiguous relationship with authority, because on the one hand I do conform, on the other hand it's sort of, that helped.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to listen to students, when they were letting off steam and angry with the system, I get that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was that, as I say, that slightly ambiguous attitude was helpful.
After university, you went and worked for, and still do, a company run by friends of ours called Art History Abroad, and very quickly started taking large groups of people, not much younger than yourself, around Italy on a sort of modern day version of the Grand Tour. Venice, Florence, Rome, the great works, the great culture. Suddenly you've got a dozen or more kids, all avidly rule breaking, all over Italy. You're keeping them alive, keeping them safe, but also reveling with them and sort of showing them a bit how to revel responsibly ish, and exposing them to this type of culture of art, the love of art, the beauty of art. I remember when I first heard about AHA, Art History Abroad, I was pretty skeptical. I thought, well, these are just the sons and daughters of the privileged going off and doing the Grand Tour, which is something that has existed in, Western culture for the privileged scions of European society for a few hundred years. Okay, that's good because you get people like Goethe coming out of it writing poems, and you get people like Byron coming out of it writing poems, and great, we have these poems and that's wonderful. But, is it really the same as going and working in a heroin addicted place in Hong Kong, or where's the value of it comparative to that? But then when I actually saw AHA operate firsthand, and we had Nick Ross on, our mutual friend who runs that company, on this podcast. So people listening, go and listen to Nick Ross and his views on why exposure to this kind of art is actually very good for creating kind of compassionate adults, particularly out of people who are going to be decision makers and people who are going to be in authority to some degree? Why does it make them actually better, softer people? And I sort of observed this at work. I saw how you and that team took people who could have turned into really arrogant assholes and allowed the humanities to humanize them. I saw it work every time. And there's a sort of alumni of people who went through that AHA multi-week bonding experience who I still know are this network of people who actually do a lot of good in the world. It's a really interesting phenomenon. And I think that aesthetics, it's an overlooked, I don't want to say virtue, I don't want to say quality, I want to say perhaps even necessity for the human soul in terms of gentling it somehow. Give me your thoughts on that. Why does art matter so much? Why does exposure to art and architecture matter so much? Because I do think it does.
Okay, I taught on those courses abroad in Italy with, as you say, with a sort of a privileged. At the same time, I was teaching in the National Gallery and the Tate Gallery in London. Same sort of job actually, which was basically taking younger groups around those collections, and in those cases, it was not the independent school crowd. It was just ordinary kids, and in effect pitched in the right way. I remember something Nick saying to me years and years ago, right at the beginning of it all, just pointing out that our culture, and this was true 30 years ago, it's more true now, more than ever. Anyway, our culture is an intensely visual one. I thought actually we all are, without necessarily realizing it, extremely sensitive to visual information, and we're fluent, we're articulate. It's a language that we're fluent in, even if we're not sort of conscious of the fact. So use that as a way in. So that's one thing. Secondly, so even in other words, even if you're showing a group of 15-year-olds from a who've never been to the National Gallery, you're showing them a 15th century painting. Actually, they'll be able to read it. They can read shape, color, and design because of advertising, and so that's a way in. Then the second way in is through stories, either the story that's being told or a story relating to the artist. Third, you can always get people to listen to you if you talk either about violence or about sex, and both of those things are pretty
Crashes and blowjobs, yeah. Tell stories,
yeah, endemic to the stories that animate European art. Anyway, so those are your ways in, and from there, actually, you then quite quickly arrive at conversations about big stuff, about the important things, about life, death, suffering, meaning, purpose, moral truth. So whether I was doing that in Italy, in the beautiful surroundings, Florence or Rome or wherever, or in a gallery in London, it was different audiences, but that was the, as I say, visual, if you like, visual literacy leading to discussion, conversation, thought, and argument about stuff that's important, and that's a rather.
Do you think in particular that the number of pictures of the Passion that people get exposed, particularly Renaissance art, do you think that does something to the brain? You know, some people would argue, God, all these pictures of a tortured man being tortured to death, you know, why are we allowing our kids to see these violent images? I mean, he's being properly tortured to death in one of the nastiest ways you possibly can. There it is, right there. You walk past it every day outside the Catholic church as you know, oh, look, he's up there being crucified again, to the point we've become numb to it. Also, but at the same time, I think that a lot of I have found that a lot of the depictions of that art, when they're done really beautifully, the idea of universal suffering somehow really comes through. Do you have is there a picture that you have or sculpture that you've consistently found that when you bring those young people in front of it, you sort of see them go, you sort of see the heart crack open, you see, and you know, now they're beginning to understand compassion. Like, are there certain images that you can spring to mind and maybe ones we should know about?
I would say Masaccio's Trinity in Santa Maria Novella in Florence, that's crucifixion.
Tell us that slowly for people that can't follow Italian names so well.
Okay, so Masaccio.
Chio.
Yeah, Masaccio.
Well, I could do with a bit of a Masaccio right now. I've got my bit of tension in the shoulders. Masaccio, okay.
Yeah. And he painted a crucifixion. It's a fresco, so it's painted onto a wall in a church. The church is Holy Mary New Santa Maria Novella, and it's
in where?
In Florence.
Okay. And when was it painted?
1426.
Okay, so it's 15th century, so 600 years old.
And it's a very early example of
I'm going to look it up on my phone as you're talking. Go on.
Renaissance art. It's one of the earliest examples of a European artist demonstrating mastery of perspective. And so in that technical respect, it's all great historical significance. But more than that is the way in which Masaccio has employed geometry, because perspective, when you arrange your diagonals to meet at a vanishing point to create the illusion of three-dimensional space or depth, it's basically a geometric technique. And Masaccio has used geometry as a way not only of creating the illusion of space, of three dimensions, which is, you know, which still fascinates us. It's magnetic. You know, we're still doing it with VR. But anyway, so there's that sort of technical sort of tour de force aspect of that painting. But more to the point, or on top of that, he's used, if you like, the language of geometry as a way of expressing visually what I would call or relating or linking the language of geometry with the sort of theological story that he's telling. And in this particular picture, it's the crucifixion. You've got God the Father standing behind and holding the arms of the cross. So it's not a description of what actually happened. It's an allegorical portrayal of the crucifixion. And God the Father's not even looking. He's looking straight out, not even looking at you. He's looking over your head. And it's as if it's, to my mind at least anyway, it's as if what Masaccio is communicating is that the message of salvation, which Christ's sacrifice on the cross made real and available to those who choose to believe, is forever, is eternal. And similarly, if you like, the axioms of mathematics within their own terms are, eternally true. 2 + 2 = 4. It always will. It always did. And Masaccio has put these two things together to give that message extraordinary impact. And it's sort of deliberately, absolutely unemotional, deliberately so, and all the more powerful for that. So yeah, that's a work which tends to work every time, I would say.
It's interesting. I'm reading up on. I've been looking at the painting on my phone while you've been talking. It's beautiful, of course, but Masaccio, Masaccio.
Yeah, is a nickname.
It's a nickname. You want? I've read what it means. Do you want to tell people what it means?
Yeah, it means slovenly Tom.
Clumsy Tom or messy Tom. Or...
Yeah. So
messy Tom's crucifixion, clumsy Tom's crucifixion. I love it. And I think that's one of the things I love about the way you and Nick often bring these paintings to life is, we get a complicated sounding name. It's we go through this with classical music as well. There'll be an Italian name or a German name. And what you don't know is that kind of means old socks in, German or something like that. And it humanizes everything. Yeah. So suddenly it's clumsy Tom's crucifixion. And then the other thing, which is so amazing, is that he didn't live very long. He only lived to be about 26 or so.
Yeah. So there aren't that much by him.
Right. As you know, if you followed any of my work, I'm an autism dad, and we have a whole career before this podcast in helping people with neurodivergence, either who are professionals in the field. Are you a therapist? Are you a caregiver? Are you a parent? Or are you somebody with neurodivergence? When my son, Rowan, was diagnosed with autism in 2004, I really didn't know what to do. So I reached out for mentorship, and I found it through an amazing adult autistic woman who's very famous, Dr. Temple Grandin. And she told me what to do. And it's been working so amazingly for the last 20 years that not only is my son basically independent, but we've helped countless thousands of others reach the same goal, working in schools, working at home, working in therapy settings. If you would like to learn this cutting edge neuroscience-backed approach, it's called Movement Method. You can learn it online. You can learn it very, very simply. It's almost laughably simple. The important thing is to begin. Let yourself be mentored as I was by Dr. Grandin and see what results can follow. Go to this website, newtrailslearning.com. Sign up as a gold member. Take the online Movement Method course. It's in 40 countries. Let us know how it goes for you. We really want to know. We really want to help people like me, people like you out there live their best life, to live free, ride free, see what happens. And then you look at what people like that did in their lifetimes. And you think, well, how did you, the son of an innkeeper, no money behind you, having to then go and find a bit of apprenticeship here and apprenticeship there and live on your wits. How did you have time to develop skills to that degree? I've often wondered about this with musicians as well from the past, given how much effort had to go into just staying alive, and then I look at myself procrastinating over work, and I've lived decades longer than a lot of these people, because you live longer now. It's a bit humbling, isn't it? To say, wow, you could actually, if you put your mind to it, you can do a whole lot more than you think you can. Okay, so that's it. That one's in, you have to take a trip to get there. The kids from the local schools that you've been taking around London for years into those free collections, which are such an amazing resource. Anyone can go see them anytime, free of charge. Is there a painting in the National Gallery in London that we should all go look at, that you've also known as like that people stop in front of, the young people stop in front of, and even and effectively kind of have to come out from under their hoodies and give it up for the human spirit? Like, is there, again, a particular picture which you say we should all actually if we're listening from the UK, turn our cars around and drive straight to the Met Gala and go look at?
There are loads, loads and loads. The one, the one that I would mention now, because it's possibly a little bit less well known, is by Bellini,
Okay.
Venetian artist. It's 1505, and it's quite a small painting. It's called the Madonna of the Meadow.
I'm looking it up as you speak. Madonna of the Meadow, Bellini. Okay, go on.
Bellini. And so it's actually a very, it's a very modest, it's a modest work, not painted for a public space. It's too small. It would have been painted for, we don't know who paid for it, but it would have gone into a sort of wealthy Venetian household. And I love it for many, many reasons, not least actually because Bellini's such an old man when he painted it. He's in his 80s, and he's taken on a new medium, which is oil paint. It was when Bellini,
oil painting's not around before that, or he himself wasn't using them?
He's one of the first Italians to start using oil.
What were people using before oil?
They were using paint where you mix pigment with egg. So it's known as egg tempera. But basically the Northern Europeans pioneered a different type of paint where you're mixing the pigment with oil, and it's much more flexible. It's very slow to dry, but much more flexible. Anyway, it came through sort of trade connections between the Netherlands and Venice. Bellini would have sort of found out about oil. And what I rather love is that, in his old age, he says, right, great, yeah, I'll start experimenting. And so he does. Anyway, he produces this picture, and it's Mary seated in front of a landscape. The landscape is the Venetian mainland. So it's as it were, a contemporary landscape for Bellini. It's got nothing to do with Palestine or the Middle East. And she's got the Christ child in her lap, and he's asleep, and she's looking down at him and got her hands fingers sort of pressed together in prayer, look very thoughtful. Anyway, behind her, so to the left, there's a tree, no leaves, and a big black carrion bird sitting in the top of the tree. And so basically, all you do is you would sort of say to the class who are looking at it, you'd say, talk to them about the tree and the bird, and it's a crow or a raven. And what do they eat? Oh, they eat carrion. What's that? It's things that are dead. And you say, okay, look back at the Christ child. Christ child is asleep. But if he wasn't sleeping, what might he be? And then they say, oh, he might be dead. And of course, what Bellini's doing is that he's placed the child in Mary's lap in such a way as to remind us of what we call the Pietà, which is the depiction of Mary with the dead Christ in her arms. And then suddenly the whole sort of painting in a way makes sense. It's that she has her child asleep in her lap, but she's having some sort of premonition of the future, of his death. And then these references to death are there all over the landscape, with the tree, the dead trees. It's an autumnal landscape, the carrion bird. And there are more sort of correspondences between figures and landscape, as if to suggest that the message of Christ's life and passion, etc., are indirectly reflected in nature, and the two are basically the same thing. And it's anyway all done in the most unassuming, gentle, unrhetorical manner by a man in his 80s who's mastered a new technique, a new type of paint. It's brilliant. What's interesting is that people obviously didn't live
that long typically then. I've been looking at the painting while you've been talking about it, and I noticed in the background there's also the landscape looks parched, and there's a cowherd not wearing any pants, who's clearly exhausted, who's kind of collapsed with his back to the fence post. Cows are around him, and there's a water with a big with a big sort of lever thing, clearly meant for by hand, but behind that there's a figure. You think, well, is that the cowherd? But no, it's wrapped in, looks like death.
Oh, yes.
Wrapped in all sorts of weird shrouds.
Yeah.
Among the cows, but equally it could just be someone coming to check out the cows. What's interesting to me is that you've got two 15th century, well, I guess this guy's early 16th century people here. What do you feel? I've got my own feelings about this, but why is that such an important time in European culture? It's the High Renaissance, but it's just before all the really big stuff takes off in the 16th century. What do you think it is about this 15th century stuff that, obviously it's the beginning perspective and there's some technical things in there, but why is that such an important time and place to bring people's attention to, if they're Westerners, to understand themselves?
I think that we can talk about the birth of the modern world occur. We can actually sort of choose lots of different starting points for the birth of the modern world, and the world with which we are familiar, the one we inhabit ourselves. This, you might say, oh, it's the Industrial Revolution, it's mid 19th century, or it's the 20th century and sort of modern art and so on. But you can say, oh yeah, Renaissance, the beginning of the modern world. It's the moment when certainly in terms of economics and trade and commerce, we have the kind of the beginnings of a continental, a sort of coherent and effective kind of banking system on the one hand.
Yeah.
We've also got the emergence of a scientific attitude towards the world itself and humanity. So an alternative way of looking and seeking understanding of how the world works and our place within it, using in effect what we would call the sort of scientific method. And that's all beginning to take hold, and it's yielding very, very significant sort of results socially, scientifically, philosophically, in the 15th, early 16th century. However, at that particular moment, it's not in conflict with the Christian faith. It's, the two go together, and all of that's going to get blown out of the water. That, if you like, marriage between a kind of rational scientific outlook, which in its own ways is our legacy from the classical world, married to a sort of Christian ideology. And as I say, that moment is short-lived, and the Reformation didn't help. The Enlightenment certainly didn't help the church. And by come the end of the Industrial Revolution and communism, etc., the church has never really recovered, and the scientific or rational outlook has leapt forward.
One of the things that always leaps out at me when I'm looking at those paintings from that particular cusp mid-late 15th century, first decade maybe of the 16th, is that's of course when the New World comes into play. And the New World couldn't happen without that banking system, as you say, that emerges weirdly out of the sort of sleeping ruins of the Roman Empire, which has been, smashed up at the beginning of the Middle Ages and is sort of, a limping, wounded thing for a while until northern kings decide that maybe it's a good idea if the Pope ratifies their rule so that they can say to other northern kings, sorry, I got to the Pope first and he signed this bit of paper, so actually I'm king, not you. And then that kind of notarization brings all this money in. And then suddenly by the end of the 15th century, the Church of Rome suddenly reemerges as a bank. Brilliant. And that bank subsidizes the conquest of the New World. The New World, of course, then resubsidizes Rome back through the Spanish and Portuguese. And we end up with the world that we know now. But it's so interesting for me to stand in front of a painting like that and go, wow, that's right at the cusp of us.
Yeah.
This kind of Western transatlantic thing that is the kind of economic and cultural reality of our culture, what we call the West, didn't exist then and is just about to exist because these guys got it together as bankers there, which meant that they could afford to commission these paintings. And boom. I always find that intriguing to sort of see a historical moment like that and realize that you can still stand in front of it. Okay, so you're exposing people to this sense of perspective. And I guess what I was trying to get at as to why it's so good for the human mind and the human soul is I'm a great believer, and so is neuroscience, in the power of awe, AWE. There's an increasing number of studies being done into the mental and emotional effects of being faced with something that you feel is so much greater than you that it makes you feel very, very small, while that is overwhelmingly beautiful. Now, of course, you don't have to look very hard for that. You just have to look outside the window. It's called planet Earth. And anything that mankind produces always pales in comparison, naturally. Even though people have argued about this over the centuries, it's pretty hard to paint Niagara Falls better than Niagara Falls is Niagara Falls. You can have a go, but it's probably going to be a little bit better. A bit like the Rolling Stones trying to be James Brown in the early 60s in their things. I heard Mick Jagger say, yeah, maybe we were trying to do that. Maybe James Brown was just a little bit better than we were. So art and nature and so on. But nonetheless, you can get this with art, I feel too. And I do feel that when the humanities are at their best, art, literature, music, it doesn't have to be the old stuff. It could be the new stuff too. It does something to the human psyche, which makes us kinder, weirdly. And science seems to be supporting this. What have you noticed with the kids that you've been helping to teach, whether in London or around Italy, so in these last decades? And a lot of us are parents, some of us are grandparents. Why is this something that we should maybe be paying attention to in the upbringing of our kids?
I think that to feel a sense of connection, even of belonging to something, as you say, which is bigger than you. But as I say, but it's not alien, and it's not inimical. As I say, something bigger, but nonetheless, at the same time, something that you, in some small way, you belong to, you are part of, is inspiring, liberating, comforting, something like that, perhaps at its best.
Yeah, I'm looking here at a study, recently published study out of University of California, as into awe as a pathway to mental and physical health. And here's some findings. There's a ton of stuff. This is published on PubMed, where you can go and get any medical study published, blah blah blah. This is a great quote. Awe then is associated with a profile of elevated vagal tone, reduced sympathetic arousal, increased oxytocin release, and reduced inflammation, all processes known to benefit mental and physical health. This is in the abstract. So those listeners who aren't familiar with what vagal tone means, your vagus nerve, meaning the wandering nerve, is your biggest nerve in your body, connects your downstairs to your upstairs, and it touches every organ in your body. And it's a bit like the Northern Line in London, because it's got two parallel branches that do hit the brain, but they can also go to different parts of the brain. So it matters which one of those branches you get on, because if you want to go to Edgware, you might end up in High Barnet, sort of thing, if you don't end up there. But they go from south to north through London, through the human body, just the same, touching all the nerve centers. When you produce oxytocin, which is the queen of our feel-good hormones, because it's the one that brings the feeling of connectedness and it makes you want to communicate. So it's very interesting that you talked about the feeling of belonging there, Tom. If you can create oxytocin in your gut, because you can create it in many parts of your body, as the vagal nerve brings it up through your body to your brain, it touches every organ in tune, and they begin to sing like a choir together. So that by the time it hits your brain like a joy-nami or a joy army, a joygasm, where you have that feeling. And we all have that feeling in front of powerful nature, in front of the ocean, in front of the sky, in front of somebody we love, in front of great art, great music, like that shamanic experience. But what's so interesting is that it has physical effects beyond that. Reduced inflammation. That's so interesting, because reduced sympathetic arousal is reducing cortisol, effectively the stress hormone. That's what it means. Sympathetic nervous system being the actually not sympathetic nervous system. Really annoying that scientists had to try and be clever and call the thing that isn't sympathetic the sympathetic one, and the one that is sympathetic the parasympathetic one. So annoying. They should be shot. But the idea that it reduces inflammation, because irritation, annoyance, anger, irritation is almost always a result of inflammation. You talk about irritated skin, So the idea of it calming and soothing one as well through this sort of oxytocin release and making us bond with each other. So I've definitely observed this watching you teach. And I've observed you connect people like this to very, very beautiful human works. I tend to do it with nature. And I see the same reaction happen in these people that I would expect to happen with the autumn colors in the forest, or a beautiful horse, or seeing the Serengeti migration, or whatever. A great sunset. So it's interesting to know this. And then the other aspect, which I have always been so impressed by, is your ability to bring play in. And the climbing up the Minster, only one of your many great moments. I always feel that you make it playful, and this is so important when we're learning. You brought a great sense of play to these Italian things in particular. Could you tell us a little bit about the Colosseum Club, please?
Yes. Oh dear, this is quite irresponsible.
Good.
Who's listening to this? Never mind. This was something which I never did this with students, because it really was wonderful.
I remember doing this with you. But I wasn't a student. Yeah.
wonderfully, I mean, a wonderful experience, but it was, you know, and pretty irresponsible. Anyway, yeah, no, what it involved was the first time I climbed into the Colosseum was with my friend Robert.
We're talking about the Roman Colosseum
Yeah.
in Rome, the big
So
Colosseum.
Robert and I,
How did you climb into it? What's climbing into it even mean?
no, I would like to clarify that this is years ago,
Yeah.
and the Saudi authorities are much more strict and will get really cross.
Yeah, this is before the days of video cameras and all of that.
Just absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
explain to us what it involved.
What it involved was finding basically it had high metal, kind of like scaffolding pole bars, which actually were weren't that impossible to get over.
How high were they?
3 meters, well, quite high, but
scalable.
You had a purchase there was a purchase, so you could get over. Anyway, Robert and I went in late, and climbed in the dark towards the top, where we sat and read Byron's description of the Colosseum by moonlight, which was in fact
Did a moonlit night that you went up there?
Yes, it was, and that was our motive for going in the first place. It was knowing that Byron had been there by night 200 years earlier, and it was absolutely extraordinary. It was a ghostly, it was empty, it was dark, and it was also something of a relief to find a young Roman couple having a jolly good snog at the top, who broke away from their snog and engaged us in a really quite a loud conversation. They had absolutely no qualms about being caught, and it did seem as though there was a security guard who probably knew and had no intention whatsoever of confronting, I guess, 4 against 1, whatever. Yeah, so we did that, and then I know you and I went in, and I have been back not for a number of years now, and I don't think I'd do it. But,
well, here's my interpretation of it, because I remember when you said, "Okay, Ru, there's this thing we got to do," and we were there together, and it was a moonlit night, and we went to the Colosseum. There it is. It's vast. It's huge. And you said, "Look, you see that thing up there? We have to climb that." And I remember looking at it quite skeptically. You've always been the climber. I think it was higher than 3 meters. I think it's more like 4. And what you left out was there was a break in the spiky fence. There's one spike that had broken off, so you could kind of climb between the spikes. But if you put wrong, the spiky bits of the broken spike were going to impale you. Then we popped down on the other side, with this anxiety in my mind, thinking, I'm going to have to get out over that thing again. And that climb up through the Colosseum to the top, and then looking down into the arena by moonlight, and then having you read this poem. I'm now going to read it. It's a bit long, but it's worth hearing, people. And here the buzz of eager nations ran in murmured pity or loud roared applause, as man was slaughtered by his fellow man. And wherefore slaughtered? Wherefore, but because such were the bloody circus's genial laws, and the imperial pleasure, wherefore not? What matters where we fall to fill the maws of worms, on battle plains or listed spot? Both are but theatres where the chief actors rot. I see before me the gladiator lie. He leans upon his hand. His manly brow consents to death, but conquers agony. And his drooped head sinks gradually low. And through his side, the last drops ebbing slow from the red gash fall heavy, one by one, like the first of a thunder shower. And now the arena swims around him. He is gone. ere ceased the inhuman shout, which hailed the wretch who won. He heard it, but he heeded not. His eyes were with his heart, and that was far away. He recked not of the life he'd lost, nor prize, but where his rude hut by the Danube lay, and there his young barbarians all at play. There was their Dacian mother, he their sire, butchered to make a Roman holiday. All this rushed with his blood. Shall he expire and unavenged? Arise, ye Goths, and glut your ire. But here, where murder breathed her bloody stream, and here, where buzzing nations choked the ways and roared or murmured like the mountain stream, dashing or winding as its torrent strays, here, where the Roman millions blame or praise was life or death, the playthings of a crowd, my voice sounds much and falls to the stars' faint rays. On the arena, void seats, crushed walls, bowed, and galleries where my steps seem echoes strangely loud, a ruin. Yet, what ruin? I'm going to end there.
No, it's something else.
It's something else. And I remember you reading that poem and then connecting that, of course, with that marble statue called the Dying Gaul, which I think inspired that poem. Tell us about the Dying Gaul. Where is it? And what is it?
The Dying Gaul is a classical Roman statue. It's in Rome. It's in the Capitoline Museum, so it's not that far away from the Colosseum itself. And it's been on view in that museum since the late 1700s, and it's been copied countless times. So, but anyway, the original is there in Rome. Byron would have seen it. He would have known copies in stately homes from England. So that statue, knowledge of the statue, printed illustrations of it and so on, were very much part of an English aristocrat's kind of classical education. So an English aristocratic traveller such as Byron it's on his list of things to see. So he would have seen it. And therefore, he makes reference. It's basically a male nude figure, prone, lying on the ground, but sort of propped up on
a dying gladiator, basically.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, no, actually, no one knows if is it a gladiator? Is it a warrior? No one really knows, but certainly dying. There is a wound, and there are
a barbarian crushed by Rome. Yeah,
sort of thing.
Dying in an aesthetically beautiful way.
So he takes the memory of the statue and imagines it as a gladiator dying in the arena, but at the same time he's also describing the destruction of the Colosseum.
Yeah.
And with that, so he's imagining what it was like in its heyday, but he's contrasting that with its present condition. He's there in about 1816. And he's using all of this to sort of meditate on, if you like, the transience of human achievement and the inevitable decline of all empires, and the unspoken kind of presence in all of this is Napoleon, who's just lost and his empire has just collapsed. Right. And that's the sort of filter that he's looking or experiencing the Colosseum through, partly his own classical education and his awareness of the classical past, and partly very present contemporary political events, which makes that poem so evocative.
Exactly. I've seen the Dying Gaul in the museum, but also, as you said, so many reproductions of it because it's such a powerful statue. And that thing, butchered to make a Roman holiday, all of the references that go out from that, even like to movies like Roman Holiday now is a classic movie, and the references from something like that go up and down history. And then arise ye Goths, because of course it's the Goths from the Danube who actually sack Rome in 410, beginning of the 5th century. They actually leave it largely intact. It's the Vandals who come along a few years later who actually finish the job. But so we have vandalism. But what I love about that experience of the Colosseum Club, and that's why I wanted you to talk about it. The whole point is that, yes, was it irresponsible? If you had said to that Roman couple up there enjoying their city and the freedom of being able to climb in there at night, because they're probably also living, with their parents' apartments, and this was a place that they could go and be together, and this is open to everybody and freedom. And life is so much more restrictive now. They could not, as residents of the city, think about climbing in there without getting arrested. The world, I feel, has in many ways got narrower since those days in the 90s. But they, like Byron, like whoever Byron encountered in those ruins, could go in there and read that poem and feel it and have an adventure with it. Should young people in particular, but also oldies like us, not lose the habit of taking this playful approach to art and life, and, take that poetry book to the place where it was done, jump through some hoops to get in there, take a bit of a risk. Isn't that what makes life beautiful?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you made it this far into the podcast, then I'm guessing you're somebody that, like me, loves to read books about not just how people have achieved self-actualization, but particularly about the relationship with nature, spirituality, life, the universe, and everything. And I'd like to draw your attention to my books. If you would like to read the story of how we even arrived here, perhaps you'd like to check out the 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Horseboy and The Long Ride Home, and come on an adventure with us and see what started Live Free, Ride Free. And before we go back to the podcast, also check out The Healing Land, which tells the story of my years spent in the Kalahari with the Sun, Bushmen, hunter-gatherer people there, and all that they taught me and mentored me in, and all that I learned. Come on that adventure with me.
It's a good lunch is also important, but
Good lunch.
right. But
What defines a good lunch?
Well,
I seem to remember our mutual friend Robert Woodward had a very particular definition of that. The same man who introduced you to the Colosseum Club.
Well, it's as much the company as anything else. But no, sorry, just going back to
just quickly, Robert.
Go.
What he used to say was, lunch without wine is not lunch; it's a snack.
Yes.
Words to live by.
Yeah. But that whole experience, if you like, is, I would say again, is one of belonging. Goethe, it's going to sound rather pretentious.
Belonging to one's past and one's culture. Yeah, I see what you mean.
The journal at one point has the entry, and he's just arrived in Rome, and he says, one becomes, as it were, a contemporary of the great decrees of history. So it is about belonging, not to, it's belonging to a culture, to a history, belonging to something in its best and worst moments. And it's in many ways a question of identity, of finding or sensing that your identity is inextricably linked to something way bigger and older than you. And that's,
I want to go quickly a bit into how you drawn these types of experiences of treading the line between the responsible and the irresponsible, the play and the serious, in your work with young people, because you've actually spent the last 20 years in service to young people. And then I want to finish with Spoke and this amazing film festival that you, and now poetry and art, that you do for young people, which is the sort of beginning of your next career, which is sort of distillation of all these things. But there's 2 things I want to just go to just before we go there.
Okay.
You started with Rothko. We've been in the Renaissance and the Baroque, but I know that your great love is Matisse. Why? Why should we all pay attention to Matisse?
I spent quite a long time researching Matisse for a postgraduate thesis, and yeah, he became incredibly important to me, still is.
Why?
Because
Why him and not Picasso? Why not him? Why him and not Dali? Why not one of those
Why Matisse? But
contemporary guys?
Matisse was an artist. Actually, very interesting. Actually, in some ways, he left an awful lot of his own, of himself out of his art. Or, to be accurate, there are plenty of references to himself in his art, but they're disguised. Picasso, on the other hand, it's sort of,
he's front and center. He's the main character. Yeah.
Yeah. So Matisse was not without a domineering sort of artistic ego, but he
was more discreet about it.
He was aware of it, and he sort of found ways to kind of duck and dive around it, let's say. So there's that. There's he took a decision early on in his career. He was quite a late starter, but he took a decision early on as an artist to concentrate on those elements of painting or sculpture or drawing, which offer a kind of consolation to the viewer. And he deliberately...
Consolation, that's an interesting...
And he avoided confrontation with the darker aspects of human experience. And for this, has been criticized for being a little bit pretty or superficial or a bit almost sort of willfully naive, which are not really accusations, I think, that are justified, but I can see why. Because actually the way in which he deployed his chosen that sort of visual vocabulary very often actually leaves a trace of the, if you like, of the sort of creative effort it cost him to get there. So it's not just pretty patterns; it's more than that, and that's why I love him.
So, joy, Matisse. Why is this important?
Okay, I'm thinking of a line in one of, well, in Little Gidding, one of the last of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, in which a condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything.
Whoa! Can you just repeat that?
A condition of complete simplicity, costing not less than everything.
Okay.
And that's a kind of, it's almost the final line, not quite the last line of the final quartet of the 4 quartets. And it seems to me that what Matisse is seeking is exactly that. There's an aspiration to a kind of purity or simplicity in his visual language. And that is what I would equate that with joy, freedom, liberty, and so on. And he does seek to find visual expression of that kind of ideal through, let's say, editing out everything that's unnecessary in whatever it is that he's actually making. But almost every time, in whatever medium he's using, and I think this was a deliberate ploy on his part, he leaves evidence of the effort and struggle that it cost him. So there are frequently rubbings out, scratches, evident, obvious corrections that are there on the particularly in the paintings or drawings, sculptures too. So so yes, his subject matter might be a dancing figure or figures, and a dance in a landscape. That's a kind of trope for a sort of paradise on earth, let's say, but it can be very glib and forgettable. But the way Matisse does that is not, and therefore he's special.
He has a particular painting called Joy of Life, which I think expresses that philosophy. And I know that Picasso regarded him as a great rival. So he obviously made Picasso feel insecure. So Picasso had to diss him in the same way that Picasso had to diss Dali, when he called Dali the great masturbator, because, obviously, I guess he didn't like other people being as good as him. And Picasso, as we know, famously does deal with all the dark stuff. And I often feel that that's just too easy. Oh, I'm going to do the dark. It's dark. It's dark. Well, as if that was anything special. The world is full of darkness. We see it all around us. We know what's been going on in the last, 18 months in the world. Just now, it's darkest or as dark can be. But is that really where we want to put our attention all the time? And people who are going through darkness certainly don't want to. So to celebrate darkness, I always feel, for its own sake, it's just a bit like social media pricking people's amygdalas so they'll buy your product and pay attention to you. Do you feel that when you're drawing people's attention to Matisse in particular, is that in the back of your mind that you're trying to make the point, really, or promulgate that philosophy, I suppose? Be joyful. Life is short, be joyful.
Yeah, it slightly depends on the context in which I'm teaching him, but certainly the idea that whatever beauty however beautiful the image might be, he does leave, as I say, sort of traces of the price paid.
No one said it would be easy, right?
Yeah. Which, so there's a sort of a sense of
got to put some effort into it.
It kind of validates or enhances the value.
Yeah,
of something which otherwise might be merely or at worst, as I say, kind of glib and forgettable.
There's a fairly unforgettable story you once told me about him and Picasso. I think listeners deserve to hear it.
I think I know the one. Picasso and Matisse recognized each other as rivals from the beginning, and the relationship was an uneasy one, but it morphed from rivalry and sort of it never entirely lost, I think, a sense of competition, but it morphed into a friendship, but not an intimate one, but one that was absolutely based on mutual respect, despite that despite their being so different as artists and I think as people. But anyway, the story is of as both now in their later years. Picasso's about 10 years younger than Matisse, and Matisse is now an old man living down in Nice. Picasso's there as well. Anyway, they used to meet up every now and again, but such meetings had to be pre-arranged through their secretaries, and Picasso obviously broke that sort of unwritten rule one time and turned up at apartment with his lover, Françoise. I think it was Françoise. Anyway, and they're trying to find where Matisse is. Matisse kept the window shutters drawn to protect his eyesight unless he was working. Anyway, so that Picasso and mistress wandering through the rooms, wondering where Matisse might be. And suddenly the very elderly Matisse pops out from behind a cupboard and goes and says, cool, 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 cool. And then it stops, horrified, because it's not his secretary and
Onion.
but it's Lydia. Picasso thought it was Lydia. And anyway,
Matisse thought it was Lydia.
Sorry, Matisse thought it was Lydia, and it's not anyway. So he's sort of discovered. Picasso loved that story because he sort of caught up Matisse, who never let anything like that ever be known or seen in public. Whereas, of course, Picasso's reputation was quite the reverse. But anyway, so yeah, in the end, when Matisse died, Picasso went into a sort of mini depression and stopped work. So, I can't remember how long it was for, but it was, he was just saying, Matisse is dead, Matisse is dead, Matisse is dead, and then paints these a series of pictures that are sort of elegiac farewells to Matisse.
Ooh, I didn't know about those. Let me look those up. Elegies to Matisse from Picasso.
No, you'd have I can't think of the title off the top of my head, but they're interiors of his own studio space in a villa that was called La Californie. There's more than one. They might be quite hard to find immediately, but they contain sort of visual links to works by Matisse.
Wow, I'm just reading this now. So when the older Matisse died in 1954, Picasso found himself struggling to cope with the sudden absence of his great rival. Yes, he is dead, Picasso said profoundly, and I am continuing his paintings. In the immediate aftermath of Matisse's death, Picasso did just that. Interesting, I had no idea. I feel also, I just realized I was a bit mean to Picasso there about dealing with the dark stuff. He was, after all, living through the Spanish Civil War and all its atrocities. So I stand a little bit chastened.
Yeah.
Sorry, Picasso. All right. So one of the things which I like about that story of Picasso jumping out from behind the dresser, thinking it was going to be his lover, and it wasn't, it was Picasso, is this idea of folly. And I can't remember which philosopher writes this. Is it Montaigne or is it somebody like that? But basically that there is no happiness that does not contain some degree of folly, that it's necessary for joy, it's necessary for the soul. And of course, we've edited a lot of the silly things that we've done, but we've alluded to a couple. But you and I have definitely gotten our PhDs in folly in many ways. And it's one of the things actually I respect the most about you. And I always respect this about people who are willing to not stand on their dignity, willing to let their dignity go. In fact, I remember once, I wish I'd been there, but you had told me that you delivered a homily on dignity at a party of our mutual friend, Robert, and then promptly fell off the wall because you were drunk or tried to jump on top of it and fell over backwards. And exactly as one should. It's that kind of thing which I think makes people their most lovable and sparks our our feeling of common humanity. And it's so important that that one can act with some folly in life. Otherwise, what is life without that? I mean, what a grey desert that sounds like otherwise. Okay, so we're moving towards the last portion of this. You spent the last 20 years pastoral care, being a housemaster at Hogwarts, I think. Is it Hufflepuff or is it Ravenclaw that you're the housemaster of it? It was one of them. But for those listeners, it was a school very much like that. Hogwarts is kind of based around these ideas. But of course, kids off at boarding schools, they're lonely. They are cut off from their families. It's tough. And it's not really how humans are ever supposed to do things. So when you find yourself in the pastoral care of these people, the fact that you understand something about folly becomes massively important. Otherwise, what tools have you got to help them through? I also want to talk a little bit just about false starts. So people often think when you're doing a story like this is live free, ride free. I'm sort of celebrating your life because you've been living this self-determined life based around following your passions and making those available to the world. And I feel everyone who's come into contact with that, myself included, benefits. It can feel like a retrospective often of great successes, but I know that actually it's the follies and the things that are not successful that are often actually the most important, that inform and then become successes later on. So I remember right after university, you were also booked to do a PhD, and that's when Matisse came in, and you wrote a very beautiful book on Matisse, which is still out there, I think. You should go look for Thomas Parsons' book on Matisse on Amazon, published by Studio Editions. Big, thick thing, and it's brilliant. And I'll plug that again at the end, and all the other stuff you've written. Tom's written a lot of books. And then that PhD didn't happen. And then right after, there was also a point where you had your first son, Hector, who's my godson. And you and Katie, your wife, who's also an old friend of mine, one of my oldest friends, moved to Italy and made a kind of bid for happiness. And you were working and making yourself, carving out a life there as a freelancer. And then boom, Katie gets pregnant with twins and got to go home and get a job. Some people would have seen those or interpreted, say, those two events. I start the PhD, I don't get the PhD. I want to move to Rome and do this big thing, and I actually have to go back to England because in terms of, well, those acts of folly, and okay, they didn't work out or something like that. But I don't see it that way at all. And I think it's very important to look at those types of experiences and then see what they give you in terms of how they inform perspective and helping other people with what seem at the time to be great disappointments, but actually turn out to be gateways to other things. Just talk a little bit about those experiences and how they've helped you do what you do, and particularly Spoke, which is your sort of next thing. How have those seemingly false starts or one step forward, two steps back type thing helped you put this other thing together, which you're now doing?
Okay. Yeah. So briefly, the PhD that never got finished. Through doing that, I met three people, two of whom we've mentioned, Nick and Robert and Cogs. And it was through them that I started teaching in Italy.
Cogs is Sarah Carr-Gorm. Yeah. Yeah.
And then really as a result, through that, I got my first Europe contract. And because of those, I would then, got freelance work at the National Gallery in the Tate and so on. And then when it was needed, or at least I felt it was needed, it got me the job at the school when we suddenly had the prospect of sort of three kids, and so actually it all led to a good end result. Anyway, yeah. So for now, Spoke is
what is Spoke?
Spoke is something that I kind of began at school and will continue with now as I've left. I will continue to sort of make it grow. But basically, it's a documentary competition aimed for school students, so up to anyone, different age ranges up to 18. And there are two competitions. One is to make a documentary about a work of art. The other is to make a short film in response to a poem. So in both cases, the students choose either a poem or a work of art and make a film about them. They send them in. I have a panel of judges. You've been a loyal, hardworking judge over the years, and then people win prizes. So it's always Spoke is actually 10 years old this year, but it's always been quite it's tiny. It's quite modest in terms of the numbers who enter, and I would love to make it something bigger. But I now have the time to do that. And so that's what Spoke is. Again, that wouldn't have happened without, I guess, me being at school. I don't think I'd have thought of it. So anyway, yeah, it's a good thing.
Where's Spoke going to go? What are you doing with it? Okay, so it's a film. It's a film that's all about art for young people, and you've now added poetry, and you've added art.
Yeah.
Where's it going, and why is doing something like this important?
I think that, okay, I mean, I need to focus effort and time into growing it, and but the reason it's important is because it's creative. It's not restricted by the syllabus or by the exam boards and the sort of that side of education within schools. So the students are completely free to do it, to follow it, whatever path they choose. They can choose any poem, any work of art, and so on. They don't have to repeat what their teachers have told them. They can make connections to anything at all. So that's the sort of creative freedom that it offers. Secondly, again, actually, it's almost where we began, but ours is such a visual culture, and the particularly with the smart now the making of films is something which we're doing it all the time, and especially for any sort of student for whom the written word is not, if that's not their chosen medium, if they're not comfortable there, and it is still the main area in which our education system tests people. If actually you want to express your admiration and understanding of a poem, you can, and you would rather do that visually, Spoke gives you that opportunity. So I thought, it's sort of it fits the zeitgeist because it's film, and it offers, it's an opportunity to be analytical up to a point, and technically competent up to a point, but most of all sort of creative. So that's what Spoke is.
It's a really interesting trajectory, I feel, your life, and one that has been governed by the loyal and relentless pursuit of what matters to your soul, knowing that that's going to matter to other people's souls, and making that available to people. And now with Spoke, it's so interesting to me. You're how old now?
60.
Okay, you don't look a day over 80. You look amazing, just like me. Right. I'm so used to hearing people say, oh yeah, well, I'm retiring now. And that sort of, like, they're just going to stop doing stuff. And I've never understood that. My own grandfather worked until he died. Like, why would you, like, my dad, he's 91. Okay, he's not doing as much as he used to, but he's still doing a lot. Why would you stop doing stuff? I can see, it's nice to have a choice about things, and it's not about how you put your time. And yeah, great, fantastic. The desperate edge of working, relaxing, wonderful, bring that on. But to not work just seems to me, we're born, I feel, to work. So I weirdly feel that with Spoke, even though I've been seeing you grow it for the last 10 years, I feel you're actually just on the cusp now of possibly the busiest period of your life as you retire. And I think you've already actually helped some young people establish themselves with this. Have some, you actually told me of one or two who've gone on to become filmmakers, having got a little bit of their early start with Spoke, now on your judges panel, for example.
There's one.
Tell me a little bit about her.
Amber Bardell, and she won one of the very early competitions with a film she made on a work by Banksy.
Okay.
And it made just beautifully filmed, really very clearly made at home. And there's some great shots of the garden shed and so on. But anyway, so, using what was available, actually quite limited sort of means available in terms of place, but in terms of the structuring of the film and the editing and the camera shots and so on and so forth, it's up there on the Spoke website. The only problem being that you need to email me first to get the password to watch it, because it's not on. None of the films at the moment are immediately accessible, because I'm slightly worried about copyright.
Yes.
But anyway, it's certainly viewable for anyone who.
Do you remember what year it was that she won?
No, not off the top of my head. 2016 maybe.
Right. Because I'm looking her up now. She's there on IMDb.
Yeah.
And there's a work by her called Art as Catharsis, it's the healing part of art, nature of art on there. She's obviously well on her way, Amber Bardell. So it's interesting how all these experiences and all this pursuit of fulfillment and joy, now you are helping people who were our age when we were beginning all this get a hand up on top of the wall. So much of it, I feel, is about quality of life. And we are in a day and age where it's a good thing that we're having the discussions we never used to have about mental health. And at the same time, I sometimes feel that those discussions have become so loud that they almost drown out the value of the pursuit of joy for its own sake, which of course is part of good mental health. What has been, I think, the untold story through your whole thing has been this thing of service. So you get religion because the messages of the Christ message, as well as a bit of a desire to rebel against your secular parents, resonate on this deep idealistical level. This leads you to go out and almost get burning wok oil thrown all over your face, helping heroin addicts coming out of the street in Hong Kong, and a lot of those would have been triad gang people and so on. And then you put that down, but you keep your idealism and you take off after art and you pursue it and you open this up. School kids in London, privileged kids in Italy, everyone who comes in front of you gets that side, gets their eyes opened this way. And then you take on the pastoral care of the youth at Hogwarts and have to do that for 20 years, which is no mean feat to be a housemaster, effectively a parent in absentia, while making the world of aesthetics and awe available for those beautiful neurological effects we explored earlier. And now here you are with Spoke, offering young people a way basically to pursue their careers. My friend, that's a self-actualized life if I ever heard one. So we're right at the sort of 2 hour, probably gone over mark. So I think we should leave it there, but I want people to know how to contact you, get in touch with Spoke. There'll be people listening who've got kids who want to enter these competitions. So if you will, could you read out the various websites whereby people can find you and your work and your lectures in London, which are happening on a regular basis and are brilliant and entertaining and funny and wonderful, and just let people know where they can come and get a bit of Tom.
Okay, thank you. Right. So Spoke is www.spokecompetition.com.
Spokecompetition.com.
And it's kind of bright. Once you're in, it's kind of bright and yellow, and then have a navigation around there. But I think on the homepage there's my kind of Spoke email is there. So if you want to be in touch, please do. Please do.
If you want to enter a film, if you want to enter a poem, if you want to enter some art.
Yeah. So
be under 18.
Yeah. And then yes, there are lectures too that I'm going.
Tell us about the lectures. How do we get to see a Tom Parsons lecture?
Lectures are in London once a month, and I have a different website for that because it's slightly different.
What is that website?
And that's just tomparsons.org.
Very good.
And they are, I'll give a lecture on an artist or artists directly linked to an exhibition that's on in London at that moment, at that time. And you come along, we have a glass of wine, something to, like some nice things to eat. And then I give.
Where do they take place, these lectures?
And they take place just around the back of Tate Modern in an architectural, rather beautiful architectural office belonging to my friend Tom. And then the money that those raise goes partly towards Spoke and partly to a therapeutic project which Tim McCowler, whose offices we use, which he's involved in creating for young people with mental health issues.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of charitable aspect to those lectures as well.
So if you've never attended a Tom Parsons lecture, you'll laugh a lot and you'll be informed and it will be joyful. Ooh, a lot of Renaissance stuff there. Someone I've never heard of you're talking about on Wednesday, the 14th of May, Itel Cahoon.
Cahoon, yeah.
Who's that when they're at home?
English surrealist artist. She's great. She's really fun.
Still around?
I doubt it.
Okay. That's Itel, Ithelll. No,
yeah.
never mind.
Itel Cahoon.
And Cahoon is also spelt weird. It's Colquhoun.
Yeah.
Those people who know English spellings are impossible. Although it's a Scottish name, actually. Itel Cahoon. I'm going to look her up.
Yeah.
And then on Tuesday, the 17th of June, you've got Jenny Saville.
Yeah.
Tell us about Jenny Saville.
She's contemporary British painter, very, very sort of interesting,
almost Dali-esque,
personal presentation of the female body.
I'm looking at a picture by her of her knees, presumably hers or somebody's, in the bath, like their little islands, and one of them has got a beautiful stone circle on it, like the one you see at Callanish in the Hebrides, going down into the bath water, and then there's other megaliths sticking up out of the bath water. It's great.
Yeah.
How'd you come across her?
That painting, the one you're looking at, is in the Tate. It's in Tate.
Super. All right. Well, I've learned something, as I always do when I'm with you. And if you are listening to this not in 2025, you're coming across this, don't worry. All you need to do to get to a Tom lecture, there'll be more, is just go to tomparsons.org, right? TOMPARSONS.org. And Tom Parsons, art historian, thank you so much for coming on Live Free, Ride Free.
My pleasure, Ray. Thank you very much indeed.
I've enjoyed myself immensely.
Okay, thanks.
Till the next time.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you did, please help us to make more. Please like, subscribe, tell a friend, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, please go to my website, rupertisaacson.com. And if you'd like to find out about our certification courses with autism, education, horsemanship, everyday shamanism, there's a whole range of cool stuff. Putting a show together like this is not an easy task. If you'd like to support us, please consider going to our Patreon page and showing us some love there. Even the smallest donation, it really helps us to keep the good content coming. So go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. Not to mention our excellent merch. Please go to our shop and check out some of our really cool rock and roll themed merch, t-shirts, hoodies, all that sort of thing. rupertisaacson.com. It's all there. I can't wait for our next guest and also to meet you there. In the meantime, remember, live free, ride free.